What's up, everybody? This is the Ikesinspirations podcast, and today I have a lovely guest named Rob Boyd. Rob is a financial educator, and he's a youth basketball coach, and I think he has an extremely interesting story, and I find him to be an incredible, inspiring being, so I asked him to be on this podcast. So, Rob, can you please do us a favor of introducing yourself and explaining who you are? Yeah.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Rob Boyd. I'm originally from Durham, North Carolina, and now live in Atlanta, Georgia. But as you said, I'm a financial educator, an investor, a basketball coach, soon to be published author.
Wow.
And just overall, I'm a lifelong learner. I like to learn things and implement things, try things, and that's really been my formula for success, is just to put, my best foot forward and try things that align with my passions or purpose. And it's got me to this point in life, and I'm just eager to see what's next, and I always love to connect with great people.
Yeah, man, that's awesome, man. That you mentioned a lot of great things. And so, I kind of want to start back with your journey, and kind of how you got to where you are, starting your own business in the financial field. And so I've learned that you transitioned from the corporate world into creating your own business. And I kind of want to dive into that and learn more about what inspired that, and what did you feel, what did it feel like making that leap of faith?
Wow, that's a great question. Just to give the full story, but quick story.
Sure.
I think a lot of it has to do with where I'm from. So I'm from Durham, North Carolina, and historically, it's known as one of the Black Wall Streets historically. And growing up, I never really had any aspiration to be entrepreneurial. I learned what that word was probably in high school, with actually a rapper from my city who had a record label called, a Young Black Entrepreneur. And throughout that, time period of growing up, I was just playing basketball. That's what I loved to do. That's what kept me out in the streets. That's what kept me focused. And that's what got me to college. And in college is where I think my whole perspective on life changed. I went to Howard University.
Okay.
And going to Howard, I think that was a tipping point where I realized that, success is not a matter of luck. It's a matter of who you know, of course, what you know, and ultimately how you approach having an impact and creating value. And I learned that at Howard, just having the proximity to a lot of illustrious alumni, to being in Washington, D.C., just seeing a different side of the world than what I saw growing up in North Carolina. And that experience prepared me to go into corporate America. And the one thing that I learned is my first job out of school. I worked at this company for about 3 years doing real estate research and real estate economics, is that I realized early on that I wasn't fit to, I guess, climb the corporate ladder the traditional way. I realized that I had so many ideas, so many things I wanted to pursue, and I needed to learn how to kind of lead my own or forge my own path as a professional and as an adult versus, the typical way that, you're taught to go after college. And I left that job and jumped into what I call semi-entrepreneurship.
Okay.
In which I started a financial advisory office at the age of 25, and I had a contract with a lot of different financial companies to be able to offer their products to people, but I was not, married to any particular financial company. I was an independent financial advisor, and I was training people and getting them licensed to do the same thing I was doing, and I started the office, and that was like my first semi-taste of entrepreneurship, where I was handed, a couple tools, and I built from there versus completely building from scratch.
Yeah.
And that experience taught me a lot about myself, and as far as things that I learned from basketball, like leadership, patience, teamwork, all these different things that came into fruition at my first real go at entrepreneurship. And I enjoyed that as a financial advisor. And that's what really made me realize that there was an opportunity in financial education, because me and my current day business partner, Ashley Fox, we both realized that in our journey of being a financial advisor, that many of the conversations we were having with clients was really educating them about how money works and what certain things are, and how wealthier individuals handle their money, and how you can do the same way even if you're not starting with a lot. And that education process, we realized that we could monetize that portion, and not even before we even get to the portion of financial services and actually helping someone open an account or move their money. And throughout that tenure, as far as being an independent financial advisor, I think that was the idea was born to go into financial education and create and build a financial education company. And there was a slight delay, slight reroute, life event. Best friend got killed in 2016. And I went back to North Carolina for a couple months, battled with depression, just cut myself off from the world, let my business go to one of my partners that I was working with in DC. And it was really a moment where I decided that I was going to lean into the things that I was really passionate about, and lean into the things that I thought was most purposeful, being that I just got a reminder on a life level that life is short.
Yeah.
And to go after the things that you really want to do and love, and don't delay them. Mm-hmm. And that event put everything in perspective. And I wanted to then go directly into financial education. Didn't know how. Temporarily got an opportunity to come to Atlanta and work in the federal banking world. I was consulting banks on how to work with Black and brown communities, how to make products and services that really meet Black and brown communities where we are financially. And I did that for 2 years, learned the banking system, learned the ins and outs of where the gaps were in the financial world for Main Street and for the everyday individual, and left there and went back full-fledged into entrepreneurship with my partner. And we now have created an app that brings financial education right to your phone or to your computer. And many of our users call it the Netflix of finance. And we're using technology to bring information to individuals who might not have learned it in school, or from their parents, or from their job, And that's the full story. And I think the whys and the pivot points within that story to how I got here today.
Wow, yeah, so thank you for sharing your story. It was very elaborate and well said. I see myself in you a lot because just like you, I'm also really interested in finances. And unfortunately, finances don't get taught often in school. So, I have to read books to kind of educate myself, and go to YouTube University to really learn all this stuff, whether it's real estate investing, wealth, maintaining your wealth, and essentially growing your capital, and being financially disciplined so you can kind of ultimately set yourself up for future success. So, I'm so curious to learn, man. I have so many questions because you said a lot. And one of the things that struck out to me is you mentioned that, unfortunately, one of your best friends got killed at an early age, which kind of led you towards a path of depression. Do you want to kind of speak towards that moment of in your life more in depth, and how that shaped the man you are today?
Wow. Yeah, I can talk about that now. And I've done a lot of work to be better with, understanding what that experience was all about, and kind of looking back at it. And I would say that I think the most interesting part of that phase of my life was that, not to say that I wanted that particular event to happen, but I was looking for something that would take me in the direction of what truly made me feel fulfilled. And oddly enough, it happened in a way that I would never want it to happen.
Yeah.
but ultimately it put my life and help give me the perspective that I needed in order to really lean into who I am and not just lean into what I'm good at. And there's a big difference. And so I learned early on that I was good at numbers, and I understood a lot of financial concepts. And I to that point, a lot of my career opportunities were based on what I could do or what I did well.
Mm-hmm.
However, I was doing those things in a way where I was only looking at it on the level of my career and career success.
Yeah.
And that moment made me dig deeper into who I am and thinking about, the things that I am gifted and talented in doing and understanding, and how do I, root those abilities in a deeper way within, moving forward, and think about, all right, who am I to the core? And the way that I looked at myself, and I think one of the most important parts of life is your self-image, how you see yourself.
Yeah.
And I saw, even before that event, through that event, and after that event, I saw myself as a leader. I saw myself as someone who was willing to do something first, even if it was inconvenient, for the betterment of everyone around me. And because that was who I am, it would enable me to make a pivot within the financial world to go from, representing, all the different companies that have products and being able to give you a financial product, to I'm going to actually educate and empower you about these topics so that you have the ability to make decisions with those products on your own instead of needing me to translate that for you.
Yeah.
And that was what that event really meant to me. And as far as that phase of just disconnecting with the world, it gave me the time and the space to look inward.
Yeah.
Because I was so accustomed to looking outward. And that was what, it had that, man in the mirror moment. It's like, all right, this is, what I felt as though an emotional bottom, and I can choose how I, rise from this moment.
Yes.
And because I had that, disconnection from everything for about 4 months.
Yeah.
Because it happened in April. And I really didn't, get back into the mode of, the go mode until like August, September.
Yeah.
And that time was like, okay, who am I to the core? And I'm going to move forward based on who I am, not solely based on what I know I can do.
Gotcha. Yeah, man. I'm glad you shared that moment of kind of trauma and despair, because something that's very interesting to me is when I meet people who are doing relatively well and experiencing success in their life. I'm always curious to learn about their internal sense of motivation, like what's really driving them to wake up, to do all these different things. And, and then how does, and what's their self-image of themselves? Like, when nobody's looking, like, what are you telling yourself? What are you doing? You know what I'm saying? And you mentioned that for you look at yourself as a leader, which is interesting, because I like to think the same about myself, so I'm curious to learn, like, what does leadership look like for you in the financial industry, especially for the Black community, because that seems like something you're targeting,
Wow. Yeah, that's an amazing question.
Yeah.
I would say, to me, leadership looks like doing some, unconventional things to get or to reach, a common goal. And what I mean by that is, to this point, the conversation, especially in, what are historically underserved communities from a financial sense.
Yeah.
There's this tone in which, for the most part, that our community feels as though we are owed something by, I guess the establishment, by the government, by America, which is, very true, and rightfully, I would say I agree.
Sure.
However, even though that can be true, that also doesn't prevent a couple of other things from being true at the same time. And those other things that I more so like to focus on and lean into is the fact that even though there are some things that should be corrected historically, I think at the very moment from now moving forward, we have the ability to lead ourselves to the results that we want to see. And we don't need the support or from outside of our community.
Yeah.
There's more so some internal work that we need to do. And I think that's the best path forward, being that in the construct of the society that we live in, power is never given. Power has to be taken.
Yeah.
And that's how our society was created, and that's how it runs. And I think we find ourselves in a position sometimes where we're looking for someone else outside of our community to give us power because we don't have the belief that we have enough to start.
Yeah.
And that belief in on a general level also applies to how we look at money.
Yeah.
So we think sometimes that we don't have enough to start to go in a better direction financially, and we need some form of external support or help, which, could be true. And I'm not saying that that's not true. However, I think in order for us to have a feasible and reasonable path to betterment and success, we have to figure out how to better use the resources that we already do have and use those in a better way and in a more precise and concise way moving forward to go in the direction we want to go in as far as the lifestyle and the stability that we want to live with.
Yeah.
And if I had to be specific, it goes to the point of the Black community is not for a lack of money. We spend over $2 trillion a year.
Yeah.
And so it's not as though money is not coming through our community. However, based on traumas, whether they're racially tied, economically tied, based on traumas that we've experienced, even generational and traumas within our families, based on those traumas, we have I will use this word, even though it's an overused word, a toxic relationship with money. And that relationship that we have with money is something that we can actually look inward and begin to fix regardless of what anybody is doing around us.
Yeah.
And that's where the education and empowerment starts, because ultimately, in order for someone to believe they have the ability to change their relationship with money, they have to be more educated about it, and they have to be more encouraged about the topic, because when someone doesn't believe that they can work their way to a better position, they misuse resources. And that's what we see on a large scale right now, is that we're just misusing resources because we don't believe if we use them in a more, I would say in a more intentional way, there's no belief that we will actually get over the hump and get to the other side of our goal, even if we were more intentional. So because that belief is there, there's no reason to be more intentional, and we just misuse the resources that do come through our community.
Yeah. Yeah. When I hear you speak about this topic, one of the things that came to my mind was the pandemic and how everyone, got lit when we got that check, that stimulus check, or when we got the PPP loan. There's like a sense of entitlement that we deserve this, and but one of the things that I don't really like is that I feel like when we're looking towards the government, or whenever we're blaming the government about some type of issue, regardless if whether it's true or not, we're giving them the power. Hey, look at what they did. Hey, why didn't he give me this? Or why didn't he do this for me? And I don't like, even if it's true or not, or regardless of what your political belief is, I don't like how we're not focusing inward and asking us what we can do better, or how can we be in a position to give to others, because I feel like the person who's truly in power is the person who can give. Is the one who can give value and give wisdom or give whatever, or give financial knowledge. Once you start trying to consume from everybody, then you're kind of in the position of powerless position. I hear you talking about financial literacy and the importance of educating people. I'm curious to learn why you're so passionate about it. where did that passion for finances come from? Yeah.
Oh, I've actually thought about this long and hard, and the best response I think I can give to this is it actually started when I was younger. My mom, I would say between the ages of like 4 all the way up to when I was about 14. So for about a 10-year window, my mom worked in a bank.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a bank teller, and ultimately, I think she got up to, assistant manager, and she worked in a Black-owned bank in Durham, North Carolina, called North Carolina Mutual Community Savings, which is no longer, and it is now Mechanics and Farmers Bank. But in those experiences, like, because there were moments where as a single parent, she might not have been able to afford to send me to summer camp, or, when school was out, she would actually sit me in the break room and give me pennies and nickels to count. And when I was young, I was just, I liked numbers. I was pretty good with math, so I liked to count. And at that moment, I didn't really realize what was happening. But I think, subconsciously, what was instilled in me was that I was comfortable with the topic of money because I was exposed to it in that way at a young age, even though as a household, we didn't have a lot of it. But being in those environments, I think that was when the seed was planted that, I want to figure out this money thing because I'm just curious about it. And I don't think my mom really understood what she was doing at the moment. She was just trying, to make ends meet and occupy my mind and my time in the way that she could while I was at the workplace with her. And that, full-fledged came around in college because I ended up majoring in economics, and I just had a general natural understanding of the concepts and the topics. I don't know how, it just came to me, and I was the reason that a lot of people passed the class because I was able to help people understand the topic and break it down. And I think that was the first experiences in my formative years, but also then in college, where I realized I was a little bit different in not only understanding the topic, but also communicating the topic to others in the way that they could understand.
Yeah, and so, you kind of speak about how you were essentially introduced to your love of financing from your mom, which is very interesting because, I grew up in a Nigerian household, and I feel like in my family, talking about your finances is taboo. Like, I don't go about just being like, hey, this is how much I made today, or this is what I'm trying to do with my money. It's kind of more from a scarcity mindset of like, save, and just make sure you don't lose your money. But we never kind of really we don't really go more deep about it. And I'm sure as a financial educator, you've come across a lot of clients and people where talking about money is a taboo, So my question to you is, why do you think that it's such a taboo for people to speak about money? Like, what is it about talking about money that makes people so uncomfortable? And as a financial educator, how do you dispel that trust so that you can make someone feel comfortable talking about that with you and influencing them in a positive direction?
Another great question. I don't know where you're getting these questions from, but this is the type of stuff I think about all the time. And at the moment, my best response to that question is that I think that unfortunately many millions of people associate their self-worth with how much money they have.
Gotcha.
And those two things are completely separate. However, because we live in this country, it's a capitalistic country where money is a driver of a lot of things, that somehow, some way, because there hasn't been an education on how to separate the two things, that the amount of money that someone has actually influences and to themselves has some level of limitation or correlation to their self-worth. And because you might be in a scenario where you don't have a lot of it, and that now is either limiting or capping your ability to look at yourself as a person of value, that because of that, you don't want to talk about this topic because the topic reminds you of your limited self-worth, and nobody wants to be reminded that they potentially don't feel valuable. And because of that, the conversation around money doesn't happen. And it's because subconsciously there's a connection between self-worth and net worth, if you will. And until you break those apart, you will never have the ability to have a conversation about this very important resource that you need to have conversations around in order to learn more about it. And also in that scenario, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a cycle that never is broken, in which your finances determines your self-worth. And if you never detach those two things, you will be on this quote unquote hamster wheel all of your life.
Yeah. And so it becomes like an everlasting, like, desire to keep growing and attaching yourself to a false sense of worth that's not necessarily true, you know? And when you talk about people attaching their identity to their net worth, I think a huge part of that is social media and what you're talking about external forces. Everyone is looking at their phones, and everyone seems to be balling. Nowadays, the topic of entrepreneurship is super hot, and then you hear about all these millionaires wake up 5 a.m. in the morning, I don't know, work for 2 hours, and they're just flying everywhere. And then you're like, man, like, look at me, man. I'm just working my 9 to 5, making $15 an hour. And I'm like, I ain't shit, bro. Like, that's probably what's come, like the mindset. And,
Right.
it's very interesting that you said that, because I never looked at it like that. But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I can definitely see a lot of people struggling to want to talk about money because they don't have a lot of it themselves. And unfortunately, I feel like the realization that you've come to, and I feel like, which I think is a more positive and a healthy perspective, I think you have to get a lot of money to realize it ain't that deep. I mean, well, money is great, but like, it doesn't define you at all. Once you make a couple $100,000 on top of that, you're still like the same dude. You still have your same traumas. Like, you still have yourself to deal with, like, you know. But I think it's easier said than done. And unfortunately, because of the scarcity mindset of the Black community, you know, we end up doing a lot of low consciousness stuff, like gang violence or trying to steal or rob or just or you know, I think our poor relationship with money causes us to do a lot of unhealthy behaviors. So, you know, we're talking about our relationship with money, which I think is interesting. I think about this a lot, and I'm curious to learn, what's your personal relationship with money? Like, what's your philosophy with money? How do you use it? How do you, like, make it, like, what? And you're a financial educator, so I'm sure you think about money a lot. So what's your relationship with money like?
Well, to this point, my relationship with money is actually, I think to most people, would be very interesting and eye-opening. So couple ground rules and parameters I personally live with that I think could shift somebody's life is, I don't use the word spend. And I learned this from so there's, I think most people would call him a prosperity preacher, which sometimes is looked down upon, but I learned a lot of things from him, and that is a gentleman by the name of Reverend Ike.
Oh, that's my name. That's great.
Yeah. So I went back, right?
Yeah.
And so if you go on YouTube, I'm telling you, this is a never-ending rabbit hole. I think I've watched every single Reverend Ike video, I think.
Reverend Ike. Yo,
yeah. So as I went back, right, and I mean, these are hundreds of videos, and like you said, YouTube University is clutch. And one of the things that stuck out for me from what his interpretation, not only of the Bible, but just his interpretation of holiness and his interpretation of a higher level of consciousness, is that money is a tool. Money is used, and when you think about, you know, the root words and the power of words, if you look at the word spend, there's a very important word within the word spend, and that is end.
Oh,
and
okay.
and he never and he talks about never wanting to end your relationship with money by quote unquote spending it, but more so if you have a mentality that you use money, the things that you do with it are naturally going to be more intentional because of your association and your definition of the word use. So for myself, I use money. I might use money to eat and nourish my body. I might use money to travel. I might use money to, to buy new clothes and to improve my appearance. And so when I think about my money and using it, is more of a scenario and more often that I'm using money in a way where I'm investing in an outcome that I want versus frivolously spending it and not putting a lot of intention around how I use it. So for when I think about investing, like I talk a lot about or teach a lot about and talk about investing in the stock market, for instance, or investing in real estate. In my mind, I look at that as using money in the moment to have more money later. That's all. That's how I look at it. Investing, if I were to break it down, is I'm using money now to have more of it later. And so whenever I, do anything with money in my mind, I'm always thinking about like, okay, how am I using it right now? And does how I'm using it right now align with all of the intentions and goals that I have for myself? And that's the baseline. That's where it starts at. And then on top of, this just general idea of the usage of money, then when I look at, the things that I use it or how I use it and what I use it on, as I just said, investments,
Sure.
I use money as anybody else uses it. But the mentality that I have about those uses is just different. And now, one of the big things that I use money for now is I'm thinking about how do I use money in order to give others a better opportunity or a better form of education so that they can empower and lead themselves instead of me thinking that I have to lead them. And throughout this whole process of life and one of the, from my best friend's death and a lot of other experiences, I had to have a real conversation with my ego. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I had to think of, when I told you I think about myself as a leader.
Sure.
That doesn't mean that I think that I am the person that has to lead everyone. I think one of the most important roles of a leader is to teach other people how to lead. The role of a leader is not to try to gather as much followers as possible. And that's just my perception of leadership.
Yeah, I agree.
So if I'm a good leader has followers. A great leader creates other leaders. So if I want to be a great leader, I have to empower, educate, and provide others with opportunities for them to become leaders. And I do that around the topic of money and finance. So I have to think about how do I get ahead of the general perception of money? How do I look at it differently and share that perspective with other people? Not because I think you have to look at money the same way, but just to give you an opportunity to have a different perspective. And you can pick up on that perspective if you want to. You could use it, remix it. That's you and your life and your journey. But what my role is to expose you to something different, because that's the only way that you could possibly think about something different moving forward is you first got to be exposed to it. And so a lot of the things that I talk about or educate about, one, it is, definition based as far as the basics of finance, but I also share with people ways to look at money so that you can have a better relationship with money. Because if you have a better relationship with money, you're naturally going to take yourself in a direction of a more stable future.
Sure. Yeah, man. You said a lot there, man. A lot of great stuff. I first want to speak about my personal relationship with money. I feel like it's getting healthier, but I'm not gonna lie. Like in my younger 20s and teenager years, I think I was very scarce with money. And because I was very scarce with money, it caused a lot of egotistical and interpersonal relationship issues with people. I'll give you an example. I'm no longer with my girlfriend anymore. She's my ex. But when we used to date, you know what I'm saying? When we go out for dates, bro, and we're spending $50 or $100, I'm like, I can't hide that. I can't hide the fact that I'm like, oh, you know what I'm saying? And so he's like, why? Niggas are so cheap, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, God. But that's just one example of many where I feel like I will be hesitant to take action because I'm so scarce with money. You know what I'm saying? And as I'm getting older, one way I'm trying to dilute that is I'm trying to intentionally give away more money so that it's not about me and I lose that attachment to it. Whereas like, oh, it's all about me, you know? So as I'm hearing you speak, you're kind of essentially saying that you view money less as an expense and more as an investment for yourself, essentially. And you learned that wisdom from Reverend Ike. That's crazy. I'm sorry.
That's one place. Yeah. It's so many. And he's just one of them that really the light bulb just went off one day. Just listening to him. But there's a couple people. If I had to list, some names of people who just gave me a different perspective on money, it would be Rev Ike. It would be Don Peebles.
Okay.
Tony Robbins.
Sure.
Bob Proctor. I guess one of the obvious ones is Napoleon Hill with Think and Grow Rich. Those minds and what I look at as those perspectives on money, really help me get out of that scarcity mentality because I was in it too. Like I think coming up in many Black communities, it's the mentality that's handed to you. It's how you're conditioned to think based on how your friends, family, and just your environment looks at that resource. And there has to be an unlearning process and then a learning process. And one thing that you said that I definitely want to share or comment on is that you just said a couple moments ago that you're trying to give more, right?
Yes.
Now, has there been, but up until now, has there been any moment in which you have given? Just in general.
Yeah, like not just outside of money, whether
it's money or anything. Yeah, right.
I give my time all the time. I give money for sure. Yeah.
So one of the things that if I would consider if I were you,
sure,
is take that word trying out of the equation because you've already done it.
Yeah,
you're actually working on doing it more.
Yes,
but from a mentality standpoint and subconsciously, if you hear yourself saying that you're trying, you're going to have a level of defeat that you carry.
Yeah,
because you feel as though, or you're hearing that you're not doing it yet.
Yeah.
Versus I've done it before and now I'm just trying to do more of it. So I'm not really trying to give. I'm already giving.
It's who I am.
I'm growing in how I give.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at it in that perspective, growing means that there's already something started. Like
for sure.
if a tree grows, there was already a seed. If I'm trying to do something, there's a reality to that in which I might not have already done it before.
Yes.
But you have. So, and words are very powerful.
For sure.
And so I would, catch yourself because at first it's going to be hard to immediately stop.
Yeah.
But now when you're going to consciously think about, oh, dang, I said that word trying again. How can I say that differently? And you're going to start to catch yourself.
No, I want to just thank you a lot for correcting me, honestly. It not only is it true, but we are what we think. I forgot this great book by James Allen, but it's like
As a Man Thinketh?
As a Man Thinketh, yes.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Great book. And it definitely taught me the power of how I think about myself. And subconsciously, I said trying. I didn't even notice it. But I'm not going to lie, sometimes it still shows that as I am trying, I am struggling to give that money. You know what I'm saying? I have to, if I'm being honest and vulnerable, I identify myself as a leader, but sometimes I'll speak to my friends about my goals, and I would say I'm trying to be a leader. And one of my friends it's my sister. She will always correct me. She's like, "Ike, stop saying you're trying to be a leader. You are a leader." Because once I start saying that I'm trying, it's like I'm wishing to do, like, it's a struggle, it's a battle, and it also shows in the way I present myself, and I agree with you. So thank you for correcting me on that. I need to be more conscious of how I'm speaking about myself. You mentioned Reverend Ike. I'm sorry, I love that because my name is Ike, and I think that's cool. But I think that's a good way of transitioning to faith. You know what I'm saying? You sound like you're a man of God, which is great. And I think it's awesome. Recently, I grew up Christian. If I'm being honest, though, I kind of dissuaded from Christianity for a couple years because I went to college. When you're in college, there's no need to actually, you're kind of your own man, and there's no really practical need to go to church. And as I started to get older, I've started really questioning my relationship with God and really trying my best to deepen my faith. And now I've been a lot more intentional about that. And it's been serving me wonders, and it's definitely given me a lot more peace within myself. So I want to kind of learn more about your faith and what's your relationship with God, and how does it help you become the man you are, and help you with all your struggles.
Thank you. First and foremost, thank you for this question. Because I don't really get a chance to talk about this a lot. And I shouldn't say never. I don't often feel that in many of the scenarios I'm in, it's always appropriate to bring up.
Yeah.
However, your question gave me an opportunity to talk about it. And
please.
my relationship with God has really grown over the last, I'd say, 5 years. And one of the things to your point, and I can relate to you a lot as far as how my relationship with God's changed over the years, is that as I was younger, especially, being raised being raised in like a Southern Baptist family and environment, that, you're at church once or twice a week, Wednesday Bible study, Sunday service. And for me, at a younger age, I didn't really get a lot out of it. I really, if I had to be honest, I wasn't feeling it. Like I was like, okay, I'm going because my mom was going, but it wasn't something that I was personally looking forward to, or that I even understood the totality of, that I would say structure of what we call church, or the Black church. And then as I got older, I realized that for me, what I'm more in line with, and what I care most about, is having a relationship with God that doesn't necessarily require me to go to a particular building on Sunday morning. And that notion that I have to do that in order to have a relationship with God never made sense to me.
Sure.
I was like, well, is God only checking for me on Sunday morning?
Yeah.
Or is every other day of the week important too? Yeah. And figuring out how to have this connection as I grow in who I am. And so now, I work on that relationship daily. But one of the key things that changed in, how I look at faith, or my faith, or just how I look at my relationship with God, is that for a long time, I guess how I taught, or not necessarily how I was taught, because that wouldn't be fair, but how I looked at it was, and how I was conditioned to look at, believing in God, is that God was in the sky. And I never, that just was something that was so far off to me when I thought about it. I'm like, okay, I get that. I understand that conceptually, but that just doesn't make sense to me. And then recently, through not only Rev Ike, but a lot of other resources, I've grown to a point in which I understand that there's a piece of God that's in every single one of us. And so,
Yes.
instead of looking to the sky per se, it's a matter of looking inwardly at the highest level of consciousness within myself, at my highest self. My highest self, the purest part of me, that is a piece of this almighty power. And what we would call having life is this piece of God in us that is steering us every day. And, some people call it intuition. Some people call it your gut feeling. I think that is a piece of God directing us in a way. And so now, my relationship with God is more so me making sure that how I love and care for myself allows the peace of God in me to shine brightest. And so what that has changed for me is that's changed how I eat. That's changed some of my habits. All of these things, because I realize how I carry myself is either going to allow that peace of God in me to shine bright and to lead my decisions and to lead me, or how my habits can drown that voice and drown that piece of me out of my decision-making process, and I find myself in precarious scenarios in life. And once I grew to that understanding for myself, so many doors and opportunities open because I realized that I'm a vessel, and there are responsibilities, spiritual responsibilities that I carry, and in order to carry them in the best way possible, I have to, not only treat myself and love myself as best as I can, but I have to be as clear-minded and potentially as clairvoyant as possible. And that requires me to treat myself differently. And so my relationship with God has really helped me change and improve some of my habits, so that when I make a decision, or as we talked about giving, that I don't have a scarcity mentality. And the reason I don't have a scarcity mentality is because I treat myself as an abundant being, because there's no way that I couldn't be abundant if there's a piece of God in me. So that's my understanding of it. So one 2-word quote that really means a lot to me, because and I'll preface this before I say it, is that oftentimes we are taught that, when you give, you what?
You receive.
Right. And that, can make sense, and that applies in some scenarios.
Sure.
But that's also very transactional. And so I was like, there's got to be a higher level to this quote or to this concept. And, so I started digging. And one of the things I came across is that givers gain. And it's a difference. So the difference is when you think about givers receive, that typically when you give, there's something is going to give something back and you receive something. And so it requires, 2 entities per se. But in the scenario of givers gain, that you could give and gain perspective. You could gain a feeling of positivity.
Sure.
You can gain something that doesn't require another entity to actually give you something.
Sure.
And so when I started to look at it from a standpoint of givers gain instead of givers receive, I started to realize that when I give, I gained a good feeling. I felt abundant. Whenever you give, it's hard not to feel abundant.
Sure.
Because you realize that you took a part of your resources and gave it to someone else, which automatically means that you had something. So therefore, it's hard to feel a feeling of scarcity when you're looking at the scenario where you had something to give. And so this understanding that I've grown to have at this point was one of the things that was, rooted in how I carry my relationship with God and how I've worked on it. And when I say worked on it, just grown to an understanding that gives me more fulfillment. And so I don't necessarily read the Bible every day, and that's not a habit of mine. But when I do, come across things that are in the Bible or in the Quran or any kind of spiritual based literature, I know that there's principles and concepts that can help my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, I don't necessarily put myself in a lane of a particular religion, even though I was raised Christian, and there's a lot of principles that are Christian principles that I still live by.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, what's more important to me is generally that I have a stronger and growing relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't matter what church or what synagogue or what mosque I show up to every weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been my walk. And that's been something that has helped me not have a clouded perspective, because to be honest, if you get too deep down into certain religious, lanes,
Mm-hmm.
it starts to be a competition of who's more spiritual, who's more religious, who's right, who's wrong. I care not to have that discussion and that I don't see any value in saying that my religion is the right one and yours is the wrong one. I'm not here for that competition. I'm here to have a relationship with God.
Yes.
So because of that feeling I used to get in certain religious spaces, I kind of backed out of that and just really focused on, a more spiritual approach to just having a growing relationship with God. And that takes information and concepts and examples and stories from all different directions to do so.
Yeah, man. I too have also been deepening my personal relationship with God, and everything you're saying about the communal aspect of religion, quite frankly, turned me off from Christianity for quite a while. I grew up in a Nigerian Catholic church where the people spoke about Christianity and the Word of God, but didn't really live by it, in my opinion. And so it turned me off. I felt like people were doing more gossiping. I felt like church was more of a social gathering than actual place to just generally like deepen your relationship with God. So I definitely can understand that aspect of not really caring what kind of identity, I'm Christian or I'm this or I'm that. Ultimately, what's most important is your relationship with a higher power. And I completely agree with you, man. And it gets real personal for me, because I like asking people about their relationship with God, because it enters this emotional realm where you really get to learn someone on a much deeper level and really understand why they do what they do. As I start to study the Bible more and pray on a daily basis, and start to see other people's relationship with God, I've noticed that the people I look up to the most and I'm inspired by are not only successful, but they tend to credit everything they do with God. And I start to see a lot of testimonies, including yours, of how God has done great things for them. And it makes me want to be a better man and also deepen my relationship with God. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. I think God created us in His image. And so when you say we all see the God in each, you see the God in yourself. That's how I try to look at myself. And I believe that God created all human beings in His image. So I feel like once I can see the God in myself, I can start to see the God in others. And it allows me to be a lot more respectful and loving of who they are.
Exactly.
I try my best to be like that, I try my best to treat people well, ask brilliant questions, show that I genuinely care and do that. And I'm glad that you mentioned your own personal testimony of how your relationship with God has allowed you to do what you do today and uphold a lot of success, No,
I appreciate that. And I really appreciate the question, because it's something that, is the engine to, everything that I do. And so, I think throughout my life, as you noted, as you said, I'm always focusing on making sure that I'm talking to or speaking to the God in the next person.
Yes.
And of course, many of us have different backgrounds,
Yes.
whether it's, racial, whether it's religious, whatever the case may be. And so there's a lot of things on the surface level that causes contention.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I'm always trying to look past that and understand that the reason this person has this perspective is because of the environments that they have been in.
Yeah.
And if they've never been in the environments I've been in, there'll be no reason for that person to understand my perspective. Yeah. And that's okay.
Yeah.
But I have to look for a way to find some kind of common ground.
Yes.
Because there will only be progress on common ground.
Yes.
And then ultimately that will give us the opportunity to accept and appreciate differences.
Yes.
And that's, me being my highest self and operating like that.
Yeah.
And do I show up like that every day? No. Am I like that every 24 hours, of the day? No. But my goal is to work on being in that mental space more often. And that's what my walk is about, is to be in that mentality more often than not. Yeah. And figuring out all the different things I need to do to be at peace with myself in order to show up in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I love it. That common ground, I think is key to developing authentic relationships, man. I think for me, it allows me to ask great questions and understand people on a deeper level. I see myself in you, man. I said that before the podcast, and we're both Black, man. We're both interested in finances. We have a relationship with God, and I can use that as a way to have a great conversation and connect with you. If I'm talking to a white girl and we're both interested in DJing, which I did, like, I'm going to talk to her through the lens of what it means to be a DJ. If I'm going to talk to an old white male who's a real estate investor and who's a multimillionaire, which I've also done, I'm going to now see myself as you, as a real estate investor. And now I'm going to like put my shoes in and talk to you about real estate, And I think being able to see the God in each other allows us to have strong, genuine conversations, man. So one thing I'm super curious about, man, to hear your answer is, because I asked this about a lot of people, and I'm curious to know, how do you know when God is speaking to you? How do you hear God's voice? I like to ask people that question because I personally believe that when you hear, I feel like God loves us so much, and I feel like if we're following His will, life is lit, like we're on the right path. That's all you got. I know. So that's why I asked it, because I feel like if I'm following God's will, man, that's all I need to do. Like, I'm on a great path. But sometimes there's so many different external factors. You go on social media, this guru is telling you, oh, you got to do this. And then this person is like, nah, don't do this. Or your mom is like, go to college. Like, and there's just so many voices and you don't know what's what, but I do know that God's voice is correct. So how do you know when God is speaking to you?
All right. This might sound crazy, but you just got to kind of roll with me on this one.
Sure.
All right, so I look at God as the creator, right?
Yeah.
So many people, whether you reference it, God, universe, creator, however you reference, this almighty, beginning creator. Even with that being true, I think God's greatest creation is the human mind. And because when we look outside or in our lives, every single thing that is in our human experience was first somebody's idea and thought. So whether it's the building you're in, the apps you see, the everything in our current reality, outside of nature and, the trees and things of that nature, but, all the things that have been created have come from somebody's mind. It was somebody's first thought or idea. So for me, to answer your question, I think that God's talking to me in the form of the ideas that come to my mind.
Okay.
And because I didn't come up with the idea, going back to my ego statement, if I take my ego out of it, I didn't create the idea. It was more so planning in my mind, which, I think is God planting, something in me to run with. And so when I think of, positive ideas that, could positively impact others, I think that that's God talking to me. And because I'm here to be a resource to others. And so let me put it in a different way. And I know I don't want to take too much time, but a lot of times God is also labeled as the source, right? People reference God as source or the source. I believe us as people are a somewhat of a reincarnation or in his likeness and in his image. So that makes us a resource. So in that capacity, that the things that I can create, the ideas that come to my mind, is God using me as a vessel. So I think God talks to me based on the ideas that he puts in my mind, and whether or not I act on them is what it decides whether or not I'm obedient or not to, his vision. And there is I don't believe that there's not any idea or thought that he has placed in my mind that can't be brought into reality. And I think my faith and how my faith is tested, or, how I measure my faith, is if I'm willing to believe in the process that comes after you get the idea.
Yeah, I agree.
That's how I look at it.
I love what you're saying, man. One of the things that I found about entrepreneurship that's incredibly interesting, honestly, I do, the money is cool, but I think entrepreneurship, if you want to test your faith, become an entrepreneur. Like, you know what I'm saying? If you really want to test how much God, you really are being obedient to God, you have no idea what's going to happen. Like, I feel like entrepreneurship is one of the greatest ways to test your faith and how much you trust in a higher power, and you just trust that everything will work out. And, I see that that has helped you a lot. And I think that's great, man. And I'm curious to just learn more about that. And just also ask you, because you're doing so much, and I also wanted to dive into you as a youth basketball coach, because I think that's cool too. You're doing so much, and and which is great. Like, you're a financial educator, you're a professional speaker, and you're a youth basketball coach. Do you ever feel like doing so much spreads you out thin, or do you feel like doing so much helps you grow as a person?
I think doing a lot of different things helps me grow.
Okay.
It gives me a very unique and dynamic perspective on life, because I'm around a lot of different groups of people. And so when you think about, how you're going to grow, and, all the things that are coming in your life, I think that when you think about, being spread too thin, or, overindulging in too many things, I think you just have to be intentional about all the things that you're doing, and not feel as though I'm spreading myself too thin. Maybe, God, as we've been talking about, maybe God made me to be this dynamic person that has to have this variety of experiences in order to be valuable to others.
Yeah.
And so, oftentimes people cut off the quote, because the real quote is, "A jack of all trades is a master of none."
Yeah.
But oftentimes better than a master of one. So people always cut off the end of that quote to make it convenient.
Yeah.
And so I look at myself as like, basketball saved my life, literally. And so it's important to me, and I'm going to give back how I can as a basketball coach. Finance is a part of my purpose and is one of my gifts, so I'm going to do that too. And that leads me to, being an investor and being an educator. And then, because I've had so many different experiences, been in a lot of different rooms, corporate and entrepreneurially, I can give direction and advice and help people create structure. So I consult at times, and all of these different things is just who I am.
Yeah.
It's not me trying to do too much. It's me giving everything I have to give. And that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I think that's great. Sometimes it helps me, honestly, because sometimes I see myself doing a lot, and some people are like, "Yo, how are you able to podcast and invest in real estate and be a pharmacist and do that?" And I'm only doing X, Y. And I feel like people are projecting their insecurities onto you. But to hear you talk about that is definitely uplifting, and it kind of reassures me. I like that quote. Yeah. I like that quote, man. So thank you, bro, for sharing all your wisdom and all the good work you've done. If people want to learn more about you, how can people reach out to you, Rob, and learn more about the work you do?
Sure. On Instagram, I think that's probably the best way. My handle on Instagram is at THE, as in the word the, and then my name, Rob Boyd, ROBBOYD. That's the best way to connect with me. Where I'm often updating information, sharing information is on my Instagram. But you can also connect with me on LinkedIn, and my name on LinkedIn is Rob Boyd. And those are the two best ways to get connected with me on social media. And then, from there you can shoot me a DM and we can talk more if there's things that you're curious about.
Word. Well, Rob, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast, sharing your story, and just kind of providing your testimony. It was very inspiring, and I learned a lot, man. Yeah, man. God bless you, man.
I appreciate you for having me, and let me know if you ever want to talk again and for another episode.
Yeah, we can definitely do a second follow-up. I would love to do that and kind of dive deeper into the topics we talked about, because I think we talked about a lot of great stuff. So
we did. All right, well, I look forward to it.
Yeah.